So it's time to discuss the Laois senior hurlers and the Laois senior footballers ahead of the upcoming 2022 GAA season. Laois, for the hurlers anyway, it was a mixed bag in 2021. It started very poorly. They lost all their games in the league. They looked destined for relegation. Terrible against Wexford in that game in the Leinster Senior Hurling Championship. But then all of a sudden they just went on this bit of a run and certainly turned things around. They beat Antrim to avoid relegation to the Joe McDonagh. They then beat Westmeath in a Division 1 relegation playoff and stayed in Division 1 hurling for yet another year. And then they nearly beat Waterford in the Championship as well, which I think a lot of people forget. So for Laois, look, there was certainly some negatives in there, but there was certainly also a lot of positives. For the footballers, on the other hand, a miserable year. There's no getting away from it. Things didn't go according to plan at all for Mike Quirke. They lost every game in Division 2 and certainly going into Division 3. It's gonna be a tough one in there for them as well. And I was delighted to speak with Damien Carter of Laois GAA TV. We broke down all the big talking points for both the Laois hurlers and Laois footballers ahead of the upcoming 2022 GAA season. So yeah, if you enjoyed this podcast, if you enjoyed this content, if you could leave a like and subscribe, I would appreciate it. And let's get straight into it.
Nowadays, you got to have that because people nowadays.
Before we get straight into the podcast, I just want to give a huge shout out to our sponsors, Declan Kirby GAA Star. Declan Kirby GAA Star Championship Journey. It's a series of GAA team children's books written by primary school teacher and GAA coach Michael Egan. You can check it out in the link in the description down below, of course, as well. Follow the trials and tribulations of Declan Kirby and his team at Smithgreen Gaelic Football Club, recently formed a promising GAA team. The book is now available in Eason's and all good bookshops, so check it out in the description down below, and let's get straight into it. Okay, I'm delighted to be joined here now by Damien Carter of Laois GAA TV. We're going to be previewing the Laois senior hurlers and the Laois footballers ahead of the upcoming 2022 GAA intercounty season. Damien, I was chatting to you off air there. You're keeping well anyways, and you had a great Christmas.
Yeah, keeping good, Aaron. Thanks a million, and thanks for having me on. Great to be talking with Laois, and great to see an interest in the county as well, and try and promote as much as you can. But yeah, it's too much turkey and drank too much beer like a lot of people, so to work it off now in January.
Great stuff, yeah, and you're enjoying all the club action as well, I suppose. Starting with Clough-Ballacolla anyway,
Yeah.
that was one hell of a journey for themselves, obviously getting all the way to the Leinster final, beating Kilmacud Crokes as well, and I suppose first time in the Leinster club final as well.
Yeah, fantastic year for them, and I know that they're devastated about the final. That they were hoping to be competitive somewhat in it anyway, and they were very disappointed with that. But what a year for them. Doing the double in Laois, coming out and unbeaten, as you said, beating Kilmacud Crokes in the semi-final and getting all the way to the final. So huge year for them, and hopefully they'll go on and build from that now. There's two or three lads there I know are looking down the age barrel and kind of thinking maybe that's the way to bow out. So, but there's plenty of young blood coming there as well. Like Killian Dunn and the likes coming through as well. So, the future's bright for Clough-Ballacolla, and I'd say it'd be very hard stopping Laois from doing the three in a row.
Yeah, and I suppose on the flip side of that as well, you had Portarlington in the Leinster Club Football Championship. I remember watching that game in the first half and thinking Kilmacud Crokes might be in trouble here as well. They might go out to a Laois team in both codes.
Yeah.
But fair play, like in the end, Kilmacud Crokes pulled through, but a good year for Portarlington as well.
Great year for Port as well, yeah, and I know they were shocking disappointed as well because they played fierce good football in the first half, especially. Again, Kilmacud, and they probably will kick themselves that they weren't more ahead at half time. They were, for the football that they played and the attacking kind of quick counter attacking football they played, they would have hoped to be maybe 7 or 8 points going in at half time up, and they weren't, and they kind of left Kilmacud in it. And in fairness, Kilmacud were a much better team in the second half. They pushed right up on the kickouts, and that killed Portarlington when Scott Osborne, who is an unbelievable keeper, but even he was making mistakes in the second half, which he hasn't done all year. His kickouts have been flawless all year. But when the pressure was put on, they didn't know where to go, didn't know whether to go long or short, and nothing was working for them. And they fell at the final hurdle as well, I suppose. But great year for them as well. And again, they've done 2 in a row, and they'll be very hard to stop next year as well if they can keep the squad together. We'll go through that in a few minutes, I suppose.
Yeah, do you think there'll be many hurlers or footballers from either Clough-Ballacolla or Portarlington who might break into the respective first teams for Laois this year?
Yeah, well, it's a funny one because the rumours now, and rumours can go around and swirl around, but a lot of the Port Ireton lads, I think there's actually only one Port Ireton lad, Paddy O'Sullivan, who is being called into the footballers at the moment because a fierce amount of the panel, I think there's 8, possibly 9 of the panel from the Port Ireton team are actually going travelling next year. A fierce amount of them going travelling. So, that'll hamper Port Ireton's year next year, and it'll put a big dent on, I suppose, on Billy Sheehan's prospects of building on a Laois team based, I suppose, on a good Port Ireton club team. So that could be a stumbling block for him. Aidan Kirby is after being called into the Laois senior hurlers. He was superb all year for Balacolla in midfield. Or there, he great engine on him. He actually got 4 points from play in the first half again. Ballyhale Shamrocks there, and it was probably one of the few that could hold their head up high in the last day there in Croke Park. So he's in now, and he'll be a big addition to the Laois hurlers as well this year. But it's a pity that they couldn't kind of build a bit more on that. Jordan Welch, is in as well from Balacolla. He was centre forward for Clough Balacolla, is in with Laois as well. But yeah, so yeah, that's the prospects of new kind of members coming in from Clough Balacolla and Port Ireton.
Yeah, and I'd imagine as well, I suppose, after a disappointing year for the footballers, and I suppose for the hurlers in the end, you turned it around late on, I suppose, avoiding relegation in both the league and in the championship as well. So I suppose a bit of confidence maybe that Laois, GAA needed, I suppose, after, what was a very disappointing year at the beginning anyways. And I suppose great to see both clubs making a good stand to themselves in the Leinster Championship.
Yeah, I suppose like the hurlers had a kind of an unusual year last year, and I listened to your podcast there last week with your man from Antrim. Now his name is gone from me, but and in comparison to their year, like they started off brilliantly and completely fell away at the end of the year, and Laois were the exact opposite. Laois started off brutal. They were got hammered in all 5 games in the league, with the exception of the Antrim game, which was the last game, which was dead rubber anyway. But got an awful beating in the first round of the Leinster Championship off Wexford, 5-31 to 123, I think it was. But then to turn it around, I suppose, they had a big relegation league final against Westmeath, which they won by a goal, and then they had to play Antrim in the relegation final out of the Championship and beat Antrim 227-221 up in Parnell Park, and then played Waterford, and in fairness, they could have beaten Waterford that day. I think they were maybe was it 2 or 3 points up with 2 or 3 minutes to go, and Waterford put on the burners in the last few minutes and ran out 5-point winners. But they had them under pressure for a lot of that game, and they could have took a big scalp there out of Waterford. So ended the year on a very, very big high, I suppose. But they'll be hoping this year to start off a bit better and then to build on that momentum again that they produced from last year.
Yeah, and what do you even think was the turning point as well for Laois in that sense? Because as you said, like going into that Antrim game, I think most people had Antrim as the favourites, I suppose, given what they'd done in the league and given the fact that Antrim had obviously beaten Laois already in the league. So what do you think maybe was the turning point for Laois there to, I suppose, turn their season around? Was the players coming back from injury, or what do you think it was?
Yeah, I suppose a number of factors there. They had a few injuries all year going into matches, and they could never seem to get kind of the full quota for matches. But I think the big point was, especially that match down in against Wexford in the championship match, the big thing was they were playing a sweeper, and they were even playing 2 sweepers that day against Wexford, and very conservative. There was lots of tactics being used, and again, Antrim especially, they kind of threw that book out the window, and they went 15 on 15, no sweeper, attacking hurling, and it worked out fierce well for them. And that carried on. Then they carried that on because they felt it nothing to lose. They went in again. Westmeath did the same thing, and then played Waterford the last day, and everyone was expecting, just will they go back to a sweeper system now against Waterford? And they didn't. They went 15 on 15, and in fairness, matched them for 58, 59 minutes. And as I said earlier, Waterford pulled away in the last few minutes. But I think that was a big thing that they kind of disbanded that sweeper especially. But there was a lot of confusion over even half forwards dropping deep, and where were they meant to go? Were they meant to allow the other team to have the puck out? And there was just a lot of confusion there. And when when everything was thrown out the door and they went 15-15, it seemed to suit them a lot more. So it'd be interesting to see how they start off this year. Will they go back to kind of some of the tactics that were used last year, or will they just go hell for leather and go 15-15 and try and match teams?
Yeah, because I'd imagine that's probably the exciting thing in some ways, is that change of system and that attack and play, I suppose, in them games. And as you said, in that game versus Waterford, I mean, Laois, they had Waterford on the ropes at one point, and when you look at what Waterford done, then obviously, you know, turning over both Galway and Tipperary, I think it was, like, you know, that could have been a huge scalp for Laois, and I suppose similar to the year previous where you nearly beat Clare as well. So there does seem to be that big performance against the big teams. Like, it's not like you're always consistently being rolled over.
That's it, and like that, it seems to be when, you know, at the end of the year when teams are kind of writing Laois off, and Laois have kind of, you know, the expectations have gone out the window, that Laois seem to produce these performances. So I'm hoping anyway this year that they can maybe, you know, produce them a bit earlier this year and give us a run of it. Now, you know, just looking at, I suppose, at the league fixtures, first of all, like I think the league fixture very favorable to Laois this year, in such a way that, you know, what is success for Laois, I suppose, first of all, and with the league is definitely just staying up. Like, you know, like they're in a tough group there. Waterford, Tip, Kilkenny, Antrim, and Dublin are their 5 matches. Like, so you'd be looking again at kind of the Antrim and Dublin games as potential winning games that you could win. And I said the draw has been kind enough in such a way that the first game they play is Waterford away, then they've Tip at home and Kilkenny away. You know, and them 3 games are very much so free shots. You know, there's no expectation. There's no one in Laois. There's no one around the country that will expect Laois to win them games. So, you know, go out and play them games. Try and get a system going. Try and get lads, you know, firing a few shots and getting ready for the game. Then the last 2 games of the league are at home. They're home to Antrim on the 6th of March, and then they're home to Dublin on the 20th of March. So they're, I'd imagine, the 2 games that Laois are going to be focusing on big time. That, you know, they're the ones that if they win one of them games, that they'll more than likely stay up. And especially the Antrim game. And, you know, like, again, if they win that Antrim game, the Dublin game is kind of a free shot and nothing that they can go out and hurl it to their potential as well. Like, so I think the league has been favourable to them, and, you know, hopefully they can do that. I just hope we don't see what we've seen last year, with big heavy defeats in the first few matches, and really kind of you see the hurlers struggling then after that with confidence and form, and, you know, as I said, tactics earlier on. Lads didn't seem to know where they were going, what they were doing. But no, I think we, you know, with Cheddar Plunkett as well this year. Last year was his first year in charge. The teams that they were playing last year, all had the kind of established managers. Like Davy Fitz was he in his 5th year? Matty Kenny, I think, was in his 3rd year. Brian Lohan, Cody, Gleeson was up there 2 years in that stage. So, you know, I think he has that advantage this year, that this is his 2nd year going into it. He's kind of whittling down his own panel. He's a few new players coming in that he was watching all year. He was at every club game in Laois this year, both intermediate and senior, and even a few junior matches, which would be kind of a second intermediate kind of group. But he was at nearly all of them, so he knows every player in the county. He's called in a few lads that have been really on form this year, but he has lost a few as well, which we'll talk about in a minute, I suppose. But yeah, so high hopes, I suppose, in the league this year anyway for Laois hurlers.
Yeah, and I suppose you mentioned there about going up against some of the top teams, obviously the likes of Tipperary, Waterford, Kilkenny. I mean, obviously you were saying there, like, they're free hits and free shots, but I'd imagine there is probably, I suppose, some hope in, you know, claiming a big scalp or two, because you've seen in the league, like, you've seen Antrim, obviously, who started the league very well last year. There is the possibility there playing those teams quite early on, because those teams won't be up to full speed. We've seen that with Clare last year, even Kilkenny to a certain extent. Tip, I'm sure, are going to make a couple of changes to their team with a new management. So maybe that's the hope, is that maybe you might catch one of those teams a little bit cold, maybe in the first couple of games, and then that will set you up perfectly then for Dublin and Antrim in the final too.
Yeah, may possibly so. And I said I wouldn't hold much hope for them, because, like, you know, the first game there is away to Waterford, which, you know, Liam Cahill is in his 3rd year down there. A home game for them. It's an ideal home game for them. The Tip game is at home for Laois, but, you know, it'll be Declan Bonner's 2nd game or 3rd, well, after the World Cup as well, or the co-op super, what did you call it, down in the Munster competition anyway, the equivalent of the World Cup. So he'll have two or three games under his belt there, and the game with the leagues there, and then the Kilkenny game down in Nolan Park. I couldn't see a scalp being taken down there either. So yeah, listen, like, I wouldn't worry too much about them games as long as you're not taking big beatings in them. And then as I said, they've them the last two games to really focus on and to be firing on all cylinders then by the Antrim and Dublin game coming into March.
Yeah, and I suppose is the expectation then in the league just to avoid relegation then, do you think? Or do you think maybe for Laois it could be a case of maybe trying to take that next step, or would it just be avoiding relegation?
To be fair, I think it's just, I think it's avoiding relegation, to be honest. Like, it would be great, if they could beat Antrim and Dublin the last two games, as you talked about there, taking a scalp out one of the others would probably leave them, up around the top two of the league. But you're talking about big experienced teams here, Waterford, typical Kenny, and it would be a huge shock for it to happen. So I couldn't see that. But so the expectations, I'm sure, are to stay up in the league and be competitive in the league. More so last year. I think that would be a building block. There's no point talking about qualifying out of it for league final, because when you look at them last year, they lost all 5 games. They were hammered in them. They had a score difference of minus 54 points in the 5 games, conceded nine goals and 126 points in the 5 games, which is huge. So they weren't competitive in it. So I just feel if they can be competitive and avoid a relegation final in the league, I think that's progress. I think that's something to build on then the following year.
Yeah, do you think there'll be many changes even to the panel as well this year? Will there be much fresh faces coming in, or players opting out, or many of that kind of story going on?
Yeah, so I suppose they're back training a few weeks now, and the word on the street, I suppose, that there's a few lads that have opted out, and a few of the lads, James Ryan, Lee Clear, who was playing for Ballacalla, he's gone travelling. Paul Sims, who was sub goalie, hasn't committed yet. Aaron Dunphy, who plays for Boris Cotton, and he was one of the best hurlers actually in the club championship this year. He's opted out of the panel, and Kieran Collier, who started nearly every game for Laois last year, has opted out as well. So, there's 5 lads that, 5 good players, probably 2, 3 possibly would have been starting on a Laois team there. I said Aaron Dunphy is a big loss. It just didn't happen for him last year. Especially the first few league games, he was whipped off before half time, I think, in both league games. Didn't really get looking after that. And I said he was one of the best performers in the championship, Laois Championship last year. But then, on the flip side of that, they have a few lads coming in there. Liam O'Connell right down the Earl, as I talked about, Aidan Kirby and Jordan Welch coming in from Ballacalla. Ben Conroy was in at the panel at the end of last year. He's a superb hurler. Seamus Fitzpatrick is Ballinakillis is my own club. He's a huge talent coming through. Mark Dowland, Cameras, and Podge Dunn of the Harps are all kind of new faces that are in around the place. So, they more than make up for what I suppose what's leaving the panel. I suppose the big worry around Laois at the moment is Paddy Purcell, and he got his All-Star nomination there. He hasn't committed back to the panel yet. So we're hoping down here that it's only a kind of a layoff and a bit of an extra rest, and that he'll come back firing on all cylinders. But there's worry as well that he's thinking about traveling and stuff like that as well, and there's other commitments going on. So hopefully that's not the case, because he would be a huge loss to Laois hopes. And if Laois are to do anything this year, then lead the reliance of him to the best of his ability. So hopefully that's not the case, and hopefully he does stay in with the panel.
Yeah, I suppose so. A bit of a shake up then in terms of players coming out and players coming in. One player I did want to ask you about actually was James Duggan, and I don't know if he's another year with the under-20s or maybe he might come up to the senior team. But I've seen a lot of the highlight reels, and obviously he had that point where he fell on his knees and put it over the bar, and there was another goal I think he scored when he was playing with his club or something like that. Could he be a player maybe who could make a step up into the senior team this year?
Yeah, he definitely could. Yeah, he's a maverick. He's playing with the UCD freshers now this year. He's up in first year in UCD, and a friend of mine, Cian Waldron, is managing the first year freshers up there, and he just said his talent is endless, and his eye for goal is quite phenomenal as well. He's the first to pace. he's kind of a Conor Callahan-esque kind of player that we haven't seen down here in Laois for a number of years. So he would be a huge player to have in there and to have on the panel. But I'd say he does have another year on the under-20s. So I'd say you could see him maybe, sticking with the under-20s and see how that goes. And you could possibly see a call up later on during the year, or coming into the summer maybe with him. But yeah, superb hurler and huge potential, and want to look forward to for the future for Laois, definitely.
Yeah, and looking at the round robin then as well, I mean, like, I suppose we've seen with Wexford obviously not having Davy Fitz in there and some potential retirements and whatnot. I suppose Dublin are building pretty well. They had a good year last year. Obviously, you've got King Henry coming into the fold at Galway. So a lot of very interesting matchups and interesting games. And I suppose with the return of the round robin, at least it will certainly give more game time to teams like Laois and Dublin, who I'm sure will, and Westmeath, I suppose, who are in there now as well.
Yeah, definitely. Like, and we talked about the league there. Like, there's 5 matches that Laois have before the end of March, and then the round robin kicking off there on the 16th of April. I think they have Dublin away in the first game. But again, I think the draw has been kind to Laois this year, Laois hurlers this year in the championship as well, because you look at the group, they have Dublin, Kilkenny, Wexford, Galway and Westmeath in that order. The first 2 games are away. They're away to Dublin on the 16th of April. They're away to Kilkenny on the 23rd. And like I said, in the league, 2 kind of free shots nearly. As such, there's not to be no expectations there. Really, in the first 2 games, it'd be great to put up a performance against both of them. But then the last 3 games are at home. And not only do they have the last 3 games at home, you have 3 new managers coming in there as well. Dara Egan on his first year down there with Wexford. You'd be looking at that as a potential scalp. Henry obviously coming in with Galway at home again. Laois down through the years have ran Galway. Galway don't like coming to Port Laois for some reason. And if often we've played them in different venues and up in Salt Hill, and we've got the mother and father of beatings, but for some reason, Laois have kind of have that hoodoo on Galway down in Port Laois as well. They should have beat them there a few years ago. And only a Joe Cannon late goal again. They were 2 or 3 points up with 2 minutes to go, and Joe Cannon scored a wonder goal, and they knocked off a few points after that. But they should have beaten Galway a few years ago. And then the last match to have in the championship is Westmeath again at home, and again a new manager, Joe Fortune, there in for his first year in Westmeath. So 3 home games to finish off there. They'll be after playing 5, if not 6 league matches, 3 championship matches. So I'm hopeful as well that again avoid relegation. It would be the Westmeath one is definitely one that they'd be hoping to beat, and then you'd be hoping to upset probably Wexford. They're out of Wexford and Galway, so that would be, I suppose, the hope for Laois this year, that they could possibly overturn one of them in the last 2 games in Port Laois.
Yeah, and I suppose there is that general consensus as well that the round robin in Leinster probably isn't as strong as Munster. Like, when you look at, obviously you have Limerick over there, but you've Waterford and Cork who've both made the last 2 All-Ireland finals. So I suppose looking at that Leinster round robin, like, it does seem wide open. Like, there's probably no definitive team that you could pick that will finish number 1 and maybe go on and win Leinster. Like, it does seem like it's wide open, and maybe open for a team like a Dublin or a Laois to go on a bit of a run and potentially cause a shock or 2.
Definitely so, yeah. And as we talked, I said about the 3 new managers in as well. You don't know what kind of a year. The first year in a place like that is always going to be a tough task, and especially going into a county that you don't know. Like, and as you talk about, like Dara Egan there going from Tip over to Wexford, Sheffield going from Kilkenny to up to Galway, and Joe Fortune going from Dublin to Westmeath. Like, it's not as if they're inside men that know the county inside out. Like, so it'll be interesting to see how they go and how they react to new voices coming in as well. So definitely a chance for the likes of Laois, Dublin to take a scalp out of one of the bigger teams and to possibly even make a Leinster final there this year.
Yeah, and looking at the overall All-Ireland picture, then I know obviously it's a while away yet, but I suppose I was chatting to a Mead man earlier, and it's kind of funny. The question isn't really so much as who you have to win the All-Ireland. I think the question now is who's going to stop Limerick, or can anyone stop Limerick in 2022, because they seem to be the front runners and they seem to be the team. Maybe last year you can make a case for a few sides, but with a lot of other teams in transition, it's looking very hard to see how anyone gets in front of Limerick in 2022.
Yeah, like they're just a phenomenal team there. And like, I don't know if you've seen it, but it showed the replay of the Munster final there on TG4 there over the Christmas a few days ago. And I watched it again, like, and 10 points down at half time against Tipperary. And, to the second half performance was just absolutely mind blowing, as was the first half performance in the All Ireland final. I think they, with a 318, I think they had in the first half of the All Ireland final. Like, so, when they do turn it on, they're absolutely unstoppable. I suppose for teams to have any bit of hope, you'd be looking at that first half against Tipperary and what went wrong for them and how Tip, went in 10 points up at half time. Myself personally, I think Waterford are going to be the team that will challenge them the hardest this year and possibly even turn them over. I know Tyke Burke is back down there. He had 2 bad injuries. And he'll be a huge boost for Waterford down there. Cal in his 3rd year down there knows the squad now inside out. The lads respect him down there. They're hurling for him. He's a good system going down there. And as you said, turned over. They were lucky to turn over Laois, be it, but turned over Galway and tipped in after that. So I think with a bit of momentum and with a few kind of lads back from injury, I think Waterford could be the team to stop Limerick this year. But saying that, it's a huge task for anyone to do it because they're such a good team.
Yeah, it is a huge task ahead. All right, and you've seen, I suppose, when Waterford have come up against Limerick in the past 2 years and in both Munster and in the All Ireland series, that Limerick probably do have their number at the minute, but they're definitely a team that's there or thereabouts and definitely part of the chasing pack. Do you think there's any potential dark horses in there or teams maybe that could go on a bit of a run or be a surprise package? I mean, you seen last year, obviously Cork probably came out of nowhere a little bit and went all the way to an All-Ireland final when a lot of people weren't expecting it. And I suppose Dublin caused a shock or two as well. So could you see any other teams maybe potentially causing a shock this year?
Yeah, I suppose Clare are the only other team that I could see possibly, and a lot of that depends on Tony Kelly there as well. Like, they're kind of coming in under the radar this year. There's not much kind of expected of them. They still have very good hurlers down there. So they could possibly be one that that might sneak in there and surprise people and reach an All-Ireland final. As they do definitely have the hurlers down there, and Low One seems to have them ticking fairly well down there as well. So yeah, they could be the outside bet for the championship.
Yeah, I suppose the big thing is Tony Kelly's injury as well, isn't it? I think he was injured in the club championship, but I suppose if they have him back, like, and he's fit and firing, and with Peter Duggan coming back into the fold as well, like, they look really, really well set, I suppose, considering maybe how they looked at the start of 2021 when they lost that game to Antrim.
Yeah. But the whole thing there is Tony Kelly, like, he's such a huge player for them. He's probably the best hurler in Ireland at the moment. That's a bold call, I suppose, with other lads around and a lot of Limerick lads on fire at the moment. But for me, when he's on fire, there's no one better than him in the country. Was it this year or last year that he had the scoring spree that he was just like knocking crazy scores out of the park from midfield.
Maybe even both years.
Both years, yeah. I think, did he get an All-Star? Different one this year, did he?
Yeah, he got one this
last year as well. Yeah. So like, yeah. So and as you said, he was injured there for the club for Ballyea. But if they can get him back firing, and keep him fit, then they're definitely a tough force to be reckoned with.
Yeah, and I suppose then looking at the footballers, the Laois senior footballers, I suppose 2021 maybe not the year, I suppose, Laois fans would have hoped for, and in that aspect, I suppose, losing every game, and even that Westmeath game as well, like you were up at half time and then Westmeath just completely blew Laois away. So definitely not the year anyway that Laois hoped for. No,
disaster of a year is right, yeah. And like, for whatever reason, just didn't work for Mike Quirk. The 3 games in the league were horrendous. Again, I talked with score difference for the hurlers there. They had minus 28 points after 3 games in the league. Only scored 33 points in the 3 games. Clare beat them in the first day. Was a huge loss because they were, half expecting to win that game and kind of build on that game, and to be knocked back by so much in the end. going into play Cork then the second day was going to be a huge task, and then Kildare blew them away the third day again. Like, so disaster of a league. They were competitive up against Down in the relegation playoff, but championship then is, as you said, first half, but completely fell away then the second half. And it's unusual because I seen them actually training a few times last year, and they were absolutely flying it in training. Now you wouldn't, to see them playing the matches and the style of football they were playing was unbelievable. And the scores, even, and Mike Quirk said in a few of his interviews, the scores that were kicking in training, and then to go out and play the matches, and they couldn't hit the barn door in the matches. So it was a complete contrast from them. But no, like, you'd be hoping Billy Sheehan's new manager this year, and he has Chris Conway in with him, former Laois legend. This wasn't Bino MacDonald, another former Laois legend. Them boys will know the players inside out. They're really building it, and I talked about the expectations for the year, and for Billy Sheehan is really a building process, and I think he has a 3-year stint with Laois here. I think could be 2 with the extension of a 3rd year, whatever. But he's been asked by, or the chairman has asked, kind of has put the word out there to Laois fans, to give him time, and that it's not going to be an overnight project that he will need. And I think he will need 2 or 3 years to kind of build his team and to get them back up. So they're in Division 3. They have 7 games there. I think a success would be probably being competitive and not being relegated would be a success there in that Division 3, because again you have teams in there that are way ahead of them, the likes of Westmeath, Limerick, probably even Antrim, Loud are probably in their 2nd, 3rd years of managers. So if they can be competitive against the likes of Antrim, Loud, or Westmeath, Wicklow, Fermanagh, if be competitive in them matches and stay up in that, I think that would be a good year. But again, panel wise, from what I hear, there's been a huge turnover of players, and they were training the last few weeks, and they have lots of different lads coming in, but they have 19 new players have been called in this year from the championship, and I'm not sure of the stats around the country, but I'd say it's hard bet that there's a panel around the country with 19 new members after being brought into it, so that'll be a big one. There's a few, the likes of Colin Begley, Mark Timmins, the older kind of crew there. They haven't committed yet whether they're going back or not. So they're probably waiting to see how things are panning out. But Laois really need all kind of hands on deck if they're going to do anything this year.
Yeah, I mean, 19 changes. That's some statistic, all right, to have 19 players coming in there. What do you think is the reason for that? Do you think there's any retirements in there, players opting out? Maybe the fact that, I suppose, last year ended on a sour note, maybe a lot of players not willing to, I suppose, to come back to the senior team, or what do you think it is?
Yeah, I'd say it's all of the above. I'd say that, the disaster that Laois had last year, as you said, losing every game, like 5 games, 5 losses, and being beaten well in all of them, bar, I suppose, the Down game. And even at that, it was a 7-point beaten in the end, like. But it was a very tough year for the training that they were doing, the commitment that they were putting in, and Mike Quirk as well. He very much so had kind of his 13 kind of regulars, and he would change maybe 1 or 2 per game. So I'd say there was a few lads probably not happy that they weren't getting lucky in, even though things were going so bad. But Billy Sheehan, he seems to have an open mind, and lots of new lads in there, and from the club championships as well. I know he got the job around the quarter-final stages, so he would have seen a lot of the football from kind of the action on the way in, closing into the championships. And looking at some of the names that are in there, Sean Moore and James Finn are in from Ballafin. Paddy O'Sullivan, I mentioned him earlier, in from Port Arlington. Danny Bulger, sub-goalkeeper, or I should say goalkeeper from Grey Cullen. But he'll probably be sub-goalie for Laois, but he's in. Ross Munley is still there. Dara Carolan from Stradley is still there. So, these kind of, they have been the best players of the club championship have been drafted in. So if they can work with Billy, hopefully that'll see Laois going in one direction, and that's up, hopefully.
Yeah, I suppose it's an interesting one with Laois, isn't it? Because like what you said there, like, I mean, I remember Laois even the year previous when you turned things around against Fermanagh and fought back from the dead, like, and getting obviously to a Leinster final in 2018. So the Laois footballers normally seem to have that Laois fight in many ways where you keep battling, you keep plugging away. But it did seem that last year that fight just for whatever reason wasn't there. And like what you said, I suppose the statistic of the 28 points against them and in score difference wise, and obviously the heavy beating by Westmeath as well. Like I suppose that's probably the most disappointing thing, because you can lose games and you can get relegated, but I suppose it's the way in which the attitude, I suppose, in which you approach those games, which I think is most important.
Exactly, and as like I mentioned a few times as well, like, you know, we're not daft down here in Laois, and we don't expect to be winning our earnings, but we do expect to be competitive. Like, and last year, you know, we weren't competitive in any game really, and that was a big kind of downfall of the team and the management, I suppose, last year. So hopefully that can be built on. As I said, if we can avoid relegation from Division 3, because with the way things are going last year, we would have to be one of the favourites for relegation out of Division 3 this year. We Wicklow at home in the first round of Championship. You know, Colin Kelly in there in his first year in with Wicklow as well. Would be obviously that's a home game for Laois as well. So Laois should be looking at that as a victory, and then to be, if they won that, to be playing Meath away in the quarter final of the Leinster Championship. And again, I think a successful year for Laois would be staying up in Division 3, beating Wicklow in the first round, and being competitive against Meath up in Navan. And I think that's all they can ask for really this year. And, you know, Billy Sheehan has said at the start, I think he will need that 2 or 3 years to build a team here and to build his system into Laois. And if he can get what I've just said there, I think the people in Laois should be happy enough that we're on the right track and that we're going back to where we feel we should belong in the Leinster ranking anyway.
Yeah, and I suppose with Billy Sheehan coming in there, I think I've seen a story there or a statistic or something where you've had a Kerry man as manager going back as far as before Mick O'Dwyer, which is kind of an incredible statistic, really. I don't know if there's any other county maybe that's, I suppose, picked from those, you know, those kind of pool of managers. I don't know if they do that on purpose or if that's you know, if it's just so happens to be coincidence that, you know, the candidates that are putting themselves forward just happen to be Kerry men.
Yeah, it's crazy, really. Yeah, because you look back and, you know, John Sugru was there, Mike Quirk, Miko was there. Just like I'd say, yeah, that's a good stat now, and I did see it a while back. All right, that's something like the past 20 years, it could be 17 of them have been from Kerry or something like that. It's a crazy stat, but I don't know what the connection is or what's it just seems to be that they put themselves forward and they fancy themselves on the Laois job, and maybe it's a way of getting their foot on the ladder. But Billy, you know, in fairness, Billy played for Laois, he played for Emo Club down here, and he knows the lads inside out. He knows Chris Conway and he knows Bino McDonald really well. So, you know, he'll probably have a better understanding of Laois football coming in than the likes of Mike Quirk did last year. Sugru is living in Laois, but, you know, even I think Billy will have a more in-depth kind of vision of Laois football and where he wants to see it and what he can expect from them. So I'm hopeful that Billy can turn it around and we'll see a better Laois side this year, more competitive Laois side this year.
And you mentioned Division 3 there as well, and some of the teams that are in there, and obviously Westmeath would probably be the favourites in most people's eyes. But like, as I was saying, as you mentioned earlier when I was speaking to David Mohan in the Antrim season preview there, like, it is really wide open. Like, there's a lot of teams maybe there that could go on a run or potentially win a couple of games. Like, it, you know, really from second down to seventh down to the relegation zone. Like, it could be another mad division where you have some teams fighting for promotion and battling relegation going into the final 2 matches.
Definitely, yeah. And again, go back to the fixtures. I think the fixtures have actually been kind enough to Laois in that way as well, because out of 7 matches, they have 4 of them at home, and the home games are kind of the ones we'd want to have at home. You know, they've Westmeath at home in the first game, Limerick at home on the second game, so starting off with 2 home games. No, sorry, Limerick is 19th of March, sorry. But the home games, Antrim at home, and they have Longford at home. That Longford game will be an interesting game because Billy O'Loughlin who was a Laois man, who was over Laois under 20s there a few years back, got them to a Leinster final. He's been confirmed as the new Longford manager, so that'll be an interesting one with him coming back to Moore Park for that league game. I'm sure he'll get plenty of stick when he comes onto the field. But so it's again kind to Laois. The games we would have wanted at home are home. So hopefully they can build on that. But it is going to be a crazy division, and I'd say you could see it down to the last game. There could be, as you said, there could be teams fighting for. There could be 4 teams fighting for a playoff spot and 4 teams fighting against relegation come the last game. It'll be very tight.
Yeah, and I suppose as well, like you have the tier 2 competition that's coming in this year as well. I'm not exactly entirely sure which way it's going to be formatted yet, but I suppose it's looking probably likely anyway that Laois would probably end up in that competition unless they were to get promotion or go on a run to a Leinster final. And obviously, if they were to get past Wicklow, they'd have Meath, and Meath are going to be quite a tough game there. So I suppose tier 2 looks very likely for Laois. So what would be your take on that?
It does, yeah. And listen, like, I'm not against this tier 1, tier 2 football, and I think it might actually suit Laois from where they're coming from. And as I talked about, building with Billy Sheehan, and if they were to be a tier 2 team next year and to build on that, and they go on a good run on that, and to get into the tier 1 then the following year, which would be 2024 probably. But yeah, no, like, realistically, that's where we're going to be, because as you said there, I can't see them being promoted out of Division 3, and I can't see them going on a run to the Leinster final. And even if they do beat Meath up in Navan, which would be a huge victory, it's an open draw then for the semi-finals, that it could potentially draw Dublin, Oracle there, I suppose, in the semi-final, and you couldn't see them passing them at the moment either. So so it looks like tier 2 football for Laois, and another team in transition, I suppose we'll call it.
Yeah, and Proposal B rejected as well. Like, it's a weird one with Proposal B, because it probably didn't really make sense that, you could win Division 3 or finish second or win Division 4 and then all of a sudden be up there, I suppose, going further in the All-Ireland series than a Galway or something who maybe wouldn't get promoted from Division 2. But I'd imagine for yourself anyway, like if Proposal B had came in there, and for Laois as well, like maybe a lot of those players who opted out or stepped away from the panel, maybe they'd be, maybe they'd give it another year if something like Proposal B was in, and maybe they could tweak it or something, just so I suppose it works for everyone. But I suppose that's harder or easier said than done.
Yeah, and I can see it being tweaked, and I can see it coming back, I suppose, in a better version of it, being brought in sometime in the future. But it's an interesting one, because Laois were one of the counties that actually voted for Proposal B coming in. So it's hard to know what way it'll go. But listen, Billy Sheehan is we're hopeful down here in Laois that he'll get things running and get things motoring, and we'll see Laois going upwards rather than downwards next year.
I suppose in terms of the overall All-Ireland big picture, then, like, probably one of the one of the most hardest All-Ireland championships maybe to call going into 2022, certainly compared to other years, and most people just chose Dublin. Like, I think this year you've probably got 4 or 5 teams there at the start of the year who probably feel like they could go all the way and win it, maybe even more. So it's kind of funny. Hurling was like that for a long time, and it's almost as if the roles are reversed. So in terms of the football, like, who could you see as the front runners or maybe the team to go and I suppose win, Sam?
Yeah, sure. I suppose it's hard to know what kind of. It'll be interesting to see what kind of Dublin team come back this year. I thought they were very poor last year. I was actually surprised to see Desi staying on now. I thought he'd be gone after last year, to tell you the truth. With no Mannion, no Cluxton still in there, it's hard to see them really getting back to where they were 2-3 years ago. Saying that, Tyrone, it's hard to know what way they'll come back with. They were very impressive last year, but I couldn't see him doing it again. So as a betting man, I'd have my money on Kerry. I think they were excellent last year up to a point, and then they did their usual thing where they blew it. Jack O'Connor back in there this year. I think he has the system and the function to kind of propel them and to make them real challengers next year. And sure, you couldn't but talk about Mayo as well being in there next year. But for me, my money be on Kerry. I think they'll come back bigger and better, and they have the forwards to do it and to do the damage. And I can't see them kind of failing as much as they did under the last few years under Jack O'Connor this year.
Yeah, and I suppose it's an interesting one with Dublin. You were mentioning them there as well. Like I'd have Desi still as the manager for now personally. Like I think he's probably done enough, obviously, when he won the All-Ireland, I suppose, in 2020, and I suppose what he's done at underage level, but definitely pressure on him this year. And like what you said, there was definitely a lot of flat performances in there, and I suppose underwhelming performances. So pressure on Desi in there as well, and pressure on Jack O'Connor, Kerry as well to deliver, because I think, you know, a lot of people probably looked at Peter Keane maybe as, well, I suppose the Kerry board did. They looked at him as the problem, when realistically, you know, they weren't a million miles away. Like if David Clifford doesn't get injured, maybe they win that game, and you probably would have fancied them to beat Mayo as well. So I suppose pressure there as well. And you know, plenty of good teams coming up and through the radar at the moment, like Derry, Donegal, Armagh. So, you know, a lot to be excited for the football championship.
Definitely so, and like and probably not for yourself. Like, well, it's great down the country seeing that there is these 4 or 5 teams being competitive for the All Ireland. You know, because it was kind of going a bit stale there, and I know from yourself, from your own point of view, it wasn't. You were delighted winning All Irelands up there, and why wouldn't you be? But it was going a bit stale down the country here, and you know, it was kind of nearly like watching the Leinster Championship at the moment, like watching the All Ireland series back a few years ago. You know, it was that comfortable and that easy for them. But you know, hopefully, like any championship, as you said, you don't want to see any team run away, but you want to see competitive. And you know, hopefully, the Meads and the Kildares even kind of push it a bit this year and kind of bring it back to a level where it was, you know, 15, 20 years ago, where it was a good competitive championship. And then, as you said, hopefully the Donegals and the Derrys and the Corks and that can kind of bring it back and kind of up their game as well, and could bring it into a better All-Ireland series altogether for 2022.
Yeah, I suppose as a Dublin fan, maybe it did get a little, I suppose, repetitive even after a while. Like I think it's one of them things, even when you speak to Dublin fans now, that probably nobody wanted to admit at the time, but the fact that we didn't win it last year, I think a lot of Dublin fans are probably happy to admit that 2020 was, I think 2019 meant a lot because it was 5 in a row and it was beating Kerry, but I think 2020 was definitely the All-Ireland that felt a little strange, really, given the fact that they won every game comprehensively, convincingly, and then in the final against Mayo, it was, I suppose, with there being no crowd, no celebration as well, like you watching the game by yourself, like I suppose it probably didn't live up to expectation, but I think well, hopefully next year they'll bounce back.
Something similar happened down in Laois here in the club championship, where, you know, Port Laois won, and I could be wrong on this, it was definitely 9 in a row. I'm not sure if they did a 10 in a row down here, but they were beaten then in 2019, I think it was. Obviously Portadown won 2020 and Portadown won 2021 again, but they were back in the final this year. And even the interviews and all beforehand, the players, the supporters, the town was a flood with green and white around the place. Whereas for 10 years previous, it hadn't been, because they were just so used to winning it. But it meant a lot more being in the final this year than it did, you know, 5 or 6 years beforehand. And I'd say that, you know, that'll be the way up in Dublin as well. I'd imagine if Dublin get back to an Ireland final this year, it'll mean a lot more to them not being there last year, and to the players as well, probably.
Yeah, well, even 2011, I think when we played Meath, I remember in the Leinster Championship, I remember that win meant a lot, given the fact that they'd obviously hammered us the year previous, and I suppose as well, even 2005, 2006, when Dublin won those Leinster Championships, they meant a lot as well. So I suppose it's funny how it works, and maybe that's probably more reason to try and restructure the championship in some ways, because it probably isn't right if, you know, Dublin end up winning 26 Leinsters in a row or something ridiculous like that, you know, because you know, you ask most Dublin fans at the minute, they're probably losing count of the amount of Leinsters they've won in a row at the minute. Yeah, very true. Yeah, perfect. Well, look, listen, Damien, we'll wrap this up here anyway. I appreciate you jumping on, and cheers for coming on, and hopefully you have a good new year, all the rest, and hopefully Laois can cause a few shocks. But once it's not against Dublin, I suppose.
Thanks a million, Aaron.